trust in Jesus, just to trust His cleansing blood, just in simple faith to plunge me beneath the healing, cleansing flood. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I prove Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more.
Patient student will acknowledge that circumstances change, but God is always ready to deliver and provide for His people. Who'd like to read the printed portion this morning?
I will. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph, and he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Rameses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And Pharaoh charged all the people, saying, Every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and dabbed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done with him. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away, and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, Because I drew him out of the water.
Okay, Alice, you want to listen in a word of prayer?
Heavenly Father, we come to you at this time, Lord, with thankful hearts, thanking you for your mercy and your patience with us as weaker vessels. Pray, Lord, that you would forgive us of our sins. We thank you, Lord, for answering so many of our prayers. Be with us in this lesson, and be of those burdens we have on our hearts. And that's in thy name.
Okay, and of course this is the account of the birth of Moses, and what led up, this is what led up to the Exodus, which the Exodus is what? When the Israelites were led out of Egypt. Now it tells us here that in verse 6, and Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. Now, what was the importance of Joseph? what was the importance of Joseph? Joseph is the one who who his brothers sold into slavery, sent him and he was taken down to Egypt, and through the providence, look what I'm looking through the providence of God, Joseph rose to a position where that he was second in Egypt, and he could help his brethren. Now they went down to Egypt as a what? They went down to Egypt as a family. I think if I'm right, I think at the end of Genesis, I think it was like 70 or something like that. Members of a family. So they went down to Egypt as a family. And this was because of the promise that God had made who? It was a promise that God had made to Abraham, that his descendants, would become a great nation. And what took place while they were in Egypt? This was a long period, probably 400 something years, the best I could find on it. But they went from a family into a nation. It's kind of like that God sent the Israelites into Egypt to grow them. Why Egypt? What was the difference? The Israelites had a problem, and that they would be susceptible to the influences of the religions around them, and they would go off into idolatry and all this. We've seen that later. Once they left Egypt, we see that happened. So why Egypt? What was different about Egypt? Well, it said Egypt was really a people that were racially prejudiced, and they wouldn't mix with the Israelites. So therefore, the Israelites was able to stay by themselves to protect their culture and all this, and they grew and increased in number, because of this. They didn't mix with the Egyptians. It said in verse 6, and Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. So once Joseph died, his brothers, now he had how many brothers? This was his brothers, this was the beginning of the nation, of the 12 tribes of Israel. They died, and Joseph, if you remember, had prominence in the nation of Israel because of his protection and the things that he did through the leadership of God and saving and providing for the Egyptians. But in verse 7 it says, and the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. So the Israelites were having children. The nation was growing. It was increasing. It was increasing in size. It was increasing in prominence. All these things that was going on. Then in verse 8 it says, now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Which knew not Joseph. He didn't care who Joseph was. Is there a problem when we as a people forget our history? This is what this Israelites, this Pharaoh, this king, this is what he did. He forgot their history. He forgot the influence that Joseph had, and you couldn't see the things that Joseph did. You could see by reading the account of Joseph's life, you can see the hand of God in that. This king forgot that. Well, isn't that a problem we have today? Everybody wants to erase their history. Well, everything that we are is a product of what we've been. In every aspect of our life is touched by the history that we have. Education, I went to school at Mulberry. Sharon went to several different schools. I think we mostly at Alma, wasn't it? There's a difference in there. So our education is different, but when we came together, the product, hopefully we've learned something from our past and we can learn something together. As far as raising kids, all I know about raising kids was the way I was raised. Same with her. So what we've tried to do is take the best of our ability to take what the good from the way we were raised and to instill that in our kids. That's what we know. So, and our history is important in that. So this king rose up that didn't remember Joseph. He didn't remember the history that the Egyptians had with the Israelites. And he looked around at the number that they had. It said in verse 9, and he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and to so get them up out of the land. He looked at the number of the people, and he was afraid of an insurrection. He was afraid if a war came, that the Israelites, which were more than them, mightier, and apparently the Israelites were a strong people physically. Well, they were when they were under slavery, because they were busy. But he looked at them, and fear overcame. And he cast that fear, which was it unfounded? Fear that he had was unfounded. Because they had never done anything as far as I can tell, about an indication. But because of that fear, they were going to deal with the Israelites wisely. Now, what about man's wisdom? Man's wisdom is flawed. And what their reasoning was that in verse 11, therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities. I can't pronounce those two words, so I'm not even going to try. In verse 12 says, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. So what the Egyptians' idea was, they didn't want the Israelites there, but they wanted the slaves. So they afflicted them, or they placed taskmasters over them. They gave them more work to do, harder work. And their reason was that, well, you have them so tired, so beat down, that they're not going to think about anything. They're not going to do anything. But we see the hand of God here. And this shows us what? This shows us that no matter what our situation is, no matter what we are going through, God knows. He knows what we're going through. He knows our situation. He hasn't forgotten us. Now, God had made a promise to Abraham and reaffirmed it in Isaac and Jacob. And this promise was that he would make of them a great nation. He would be with them. God always keeps his promises. We have promises today, don't we? From who? From God. That he will always be with us. He will always guide us. But there's a problem with that. That, he will guide us, he will lead us, but we have to seek and yield to his leadership. Said, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. So instead of making them have less children, they multiplied, they had more. And then they come up with another plan. And again, this is the wisdom of who? It's the wisdom of man. In verse 22 it says, and Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall leave alive. Now what was Pharaoh's plan? If you read through this, we know that he came up with this plan, and something I'm not sure of, but the way I see this, that he charged says in 22, and Pharaoh charged all his people. All his people. he charged the Israelites. Now, is this only the male babies of the Israelites, or does this include the Egyptian babies? He charged all his people, says. That every son that is born ye shall cast into the river. Now before this, his plan was to have the midwives to kill any male babies. There was two midwives who are mentioned, and again, I can't pronounce their names. Who was it? Told us one time, if you can't pronounce a name, just say Moses. You know. But these two midwives refused to kill the babies. Now, I don't know whether these midwives were Egyptian or whether they were Israelites. It doesn't really say, does it? But either way, it would work. If they were Israelites, then their faith in God was such that they wouldn't be obedient. If they were Egyptians, then their faith in God was the same. And it could be because we know that the Israelites had an influence over some people that around them. So maybe these midwives, if they were Egyptians, maybe they come to know the Lord through the mothers that they were working for, that they were having these babies. But they refused to kill the babies. And when Pharaoh called them before him, now that was a sin, something that they could have been put to death for. But do we believe that God was with these midwives and the answer that they gave? What their answer was that, well, the Egyptians women are more lively, or the Israelite women are more lively than the Egyptians. And therefore they had the babies without even calling a midwife. Do you think they lied? I don't know. It's possible. But remember, it says that the Israelites were increasing mightily in number. But because of what these midwives did, it tells us that God blessed them and gave them their own families. And this set the stage for a deliverer to come. And when a lot of times when God begins a move, begins something, a lot of times he starts with what? He starts with the baby. Now, we know about the account of Jesus. We know that Jesus came to this earth in the form of a baby. He was born. He was raised. And we know about his life and the purpose of his life. But can you think of others who were babies that came, that had a significance to them and a time in the nation of Israel? Well, what about Samuel? Remember Samuel? He was he was born. It wasn't Samuel's mother who prayed to God, if you'll give me a child, that I'll dedicate him to you. So you have Samuel, you have John the Baptist, who came as a baby. You know, both of these made a big difference in the nation of Israel. But it set the stage for Moses to be born, and for God to start bringing together his plan for the deliverance of the nation of Israel. And that came about because of the cry of the people of Israel in their bondage. In the second chapter, in verse 1, it says, "And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she built for him, or my eyes are watering. She took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. So Moses was born. His mother, because of the decree from Pharaoh that all babies would be cast into the river, right? She was obedient to the command, wasn't she? She did cast him into the river. She was obedient to Pharaoh's command. But she made a provision. And she took for him an ark of bulrushes. Now, is there another ark that you can think of? The ark that Noah built under the leadership of God. He was told to build it. He was told how to build it. And he was obedient to what God told him. She did this for her son because of her love for him. And she put it in the river and cast it off. Now his sister, what was her name? Miriam. She was watching to see what would happen. Now, can you imagine the anguish that his mother was going through? She didn't know the end of the story. She just she couldn't hide him any longer. Now, if you've had kids, kids can get pretty noisy when they're what? Say here he was about 3 months old. They're not quiet when they cry. And she couldn't hide him any longer. So she did what she could do to protect her child. hoping that, someone, or he would go somewhere and someone would take care of him. That was faith on her part. Now, his sister stood off and was watching to see what would happen. Well, what happened? The ark floated by, and who saw it? Pharaoh's daughter was the one that saw it. And she pulled the baby out of the ark. And the Bible tells us that he was doing what? When she pulled him out, Moses was doing what babies do. He was crying. He was crying. This was here Pharaoh's daughter. Pulled him out. The baby was crying. Well, when your kids were crying, what did you do? Well, you tried to do what you could do to get them to quit. Whatever they needed, you were going to supply it. Whether they needed a hug, whether they needed a bottle, whether they needed changing, you did what you could to provide for that baby. And it seems to me that Pharaoh's daughter, her heart melted when she heard the baby crying. Her heart went out to him. And I believe this was over the inspiration of God, over the leadership of God. God knew what was going to happen. But she made the decision. She made the choice. And she knew also the danger. Because the Bible tells us that she saw that this was a child of the Israelites. But still yet, she chose to take him. And his sister, Miriam, I'm not sure how you pronounce that either, but she came to Pharaoh's daughter and said, well, I can go get an Israelite woman as his nurse. And she took Pharaoh's daughter, told her to go. Well, who did she get? She got his mother to come and to be a nursemaid to her child. To her child. Not only that, but Pharaoh's daughter said, I'll pay you. I'm going to pay you for taking care of your child. Now that would go over good with a lot of people today. Because people today, that's what they're motivated by more, is what I can get. What you'll give me, whether I do anything for you or not. What I can get that doesn't cost me anything. But because of this, because of the love that she had for Moses, his mother, also the love that Pharaoh's daughter had for Moses. And both of them loved Moses. Pharaoh's daughter took him to raise as her child. Adopted child. Verse 10 says, and the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, because I drew him out of the water. And Moses became, according to the Israelites, the most important person in their history. Didn't he? But Moses was simply a man. Moses wasn't God. The Israelites, as I said earlier, they were in Egypt, but they were a close-knit group and a family and a nation, because they were isolated by the policies of the Egyptians from the other nations around them. As I said, the Egyptians were prejudiced against them. They didn't intermingle with them. All they wanted them was as slaves. They didn't socialize together. But do you think we need to look at this in the light of today and the church? In this account, who would be the church? If you're going to associate this account of Moses' birth, who would be the church? If you're going to relate it to the church. I think pretty much Moses' mother and Pharaoh's daughter both in some ways picture the church today, because they both cared about Moses. They cared about him. They loved him. And they wanted the best for him. We as a church should do what? We should love others. Now, Moses, or Pharaoh's daughter, she wasn't an Israelite. She was a Gentile. Because if you wasn't a Jew, you were a Gentile. What they did was to provide for Moses, to care for Moses, and they also influenced others around them. I believe the midwives, whether they were Egyptian or not, I don't know about that. I think what the Bible said was simply that they were midwives to the Israelites. But irregardless, they were influenced by the Israelites in that they believed God. Pharaoh's daughter, I believe, was influenced by God. As I said, this set the stage for the deliverance that God had for the nation of Israel. She named him Moses because she drew him out of the water. I've read this time and, for years, but it never dawned on me that Moses' mother didn't name him. Had you ever thought about that? His name came from Pharaoh's daughter. That's all the time we have.